up today, Korea's National Assembly Speaker is set to meet with the rival parties on two major bills. He might decide to invoke his authority to bring them to a floor vote if no compromise is reached. In a report to a UN body, Japan denies coercing women into sexual slavery during World War II. The move puts extra strain on Tokyo's recent landmark deal with Korea on wartime sex slavery. Plus, a top US military official says the possible deployment of a US missile defense system to South Korea is an alliance decision that should be made by both Seoul and Washington. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Monday, February 1st here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, the National Assembly Speaker will meet with the leaders of Korea's two main rival parties on this Monday to discuss two bills they agreed to vote on and then didn't. Jung Hui-hwa is likely to discuss the proposal to use his authority to bring the bills up for a full Assembly vote, which he has previously rejected, but the ruling party favours. Now, one bill is aimed at reinvigorating business activities by easing regulations, stripping back on red tape. The other calls for efforts to improve North Korea's human rights situation by setting up a dedicated investigation centre. That bill's passage seems unlikely, though, as similar bills have been scrapped in recent years, with opponents saying such a measure could strain into Korean relations. South Korea's Prime Minister has called for the swift passage of a pending counterterrorism bill after a fake bomb was discovered at the nation's main airport over the weekend. Speaking at an emergency cabinet meeting on Sunday, Hwang Kyo-an said now is the right time to pass the bill that's actually been pending for over 10 years, as prevention is the best measure against terrorism. Now, the number of terror threats has increased from 30 to 50 a year since 2010, and more than 50 foreign nationals have been deported from Korea for supposed ties to terrorist groups over that same roughly 5-year period. The meeting was called the day after a box thought to contain explosives was found at Incheon International Airport. However, the only items found were 2 butane canisters and a bottle of mineral water, among some other sundry items. Now, President Park Geun-hye's main focus this year is job creation. More specifically, it's ensuring there's a steady supply of decent, stable and well-paying jobs for the nation's young people. Her administration's efforts come as the youth unemployment rate remains stubbornly high. For more on how this issue landed at the top of President Park's agenda, Park Ji-won reports.
Job creation will be a major focus for the government this year. During an annual series of policy briefings for the president that wrapped up last week, ministry after ministry targeted job creation as one of their main goals. President Park Geun-hye also stressed the importance of job creation at each and every briefing.
현장의 목소리를 귀담아 듣고 꼼꼼하게 정책 설계를 잘 해서 더 많은 일자리, 더 좋은 일자리로 국민들께 보답해야 하겠습니다.
After the briefing sessions wrapped up last week, the president paid a visit to the Youth Hope Foundation, which she helped launch, and which provides customized employment services for young people. During the visit, she again mentioned youth job creation as one of her administration's top priorities.
어떻게 하면 이 청년들에게 이 분야에서 더 많은 일자리를 만들 건가? 어떻게 하면 더 많은 기회를 만들 건가? 이게 일관되게 그 모든 그 부처 업무 보고에서 중요한 포인트였습니다.
The youth unemployment rate reached a 15-year high of more than 9% last year, and 1 in 5 of those who do find employment land in temporary positions, prompting concerns about the nature and quality of available work. Given that the government is seeking to make sure that the bulk of the newly created jobs are full-time, high-quality positions. To that end, it introduced a new labor guidelines that will go into effect on Monday. It says existing laws will be applied more strictly to ensure that companies that aim to exploit young interns or trainees as cheap labor face punishment. The guideline also says night and weekend shifts will be prohibited in principle for internships, and the proportion of internships should not exceed 10% of a company's regular workforce. 박지원, Arirang News.
Now, Japan has submitted a report to a UN agency in which it denies its military coerced women into sexual slavery during World War II. The report was submitted to the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women ahead of a committee meeting that will happen in mid-February. Seoul-based Yonhap news agency confirmed the content of the report on Sunday. This report concludes there is no evidence of coercion after a full study on the matter was conducted by Tokyo. Korea's foreign ministry says coercion is an undeniable historical fact, adding that Japan should refrain from comments that could harm the bilateral agreement struck between the two countries late last year. Under that bilateral deal, Japan apologized and agreed to pay some $8 million as compensation to the surviving victims. Now, the possible deployment of a US missile defense system to South Korea has once again become a real hot topic here in the country following North Korea's recent nuclear test. The latest provocation appears to be pushing Seoul closer to making a big decision on this matter. Our Oh Soo-young has the details.
Deploying the United States Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System to the Korean Peninsula is an alliance decision that should be made by both South Korea and the US. That's according to US Pacific Commander Harry B. Harris Jr., who spoke to Seoul-based Yonhap news agency for an interview released Sunday. North Korea's fourth nuclear test on January 6 has renewed missile defense talks in the south, including the possibility of a third deployment to protect South Korea from the North's growing missile threats. While Seoul's defense ministry has previously denied having talks with the US on the matter, it expressed a positive stance about it last week, saying THAAD could be of help to the country's national security and defense. However, THAAD deployment is a sensitive issue in the region. China sees it as a threat to its national security, fearing the radar systems will subject it to close monitoring. Pacific Commander Harris said in regard to Beijing's opposition that its opinions are simply interesting, and that any deployment decision should be made by Seoul and Washington together. He also reiterated his concerns about North Korea, saying it is the biggest threat, not only to the peninsula, but a threat to Japan, Hawaii and the US mainland, and said he cannot rule out the possibility that the regime might be able to miniaturize or develop a long-range weapon. To address the current regional security challenges, the commander encouraged closer trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, the South Korean government and the ruling party have agreed to expand the supply of domestic beef, seafood and vegetables in a bid to stabilise prices ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday, which starts next Monday. Now, these food items are in demand as they all go on the traditional Solal family dinner table. Prices have already started to rise and consumption is expected to increase during the holiday. The average daily supply of domestic beef will increase from the current 580 tonnes to 800 tonnes. 800 more tonnes of yellow corvina will also be made available. On top of that, a fuel surcharge of around $1 once levied on domestic flight passengers is going to be lifted starting this Monday, reflecting the decline in global oil prices. Now, good news for foreign tourists, as they will no longer have to pay such high value-added taxes at major department stores and supermarket chains in Korea. Also, starting on this Monday, the 10% tax will be left off all products that cost between $25 to $166. For more expensive products, shoppers will have to pay the tax, but they can get the refund at a later time. Now, each person will be allowed to buy up to 1 million won or $830 worth of goods completely tax-free. Select branches of major department stores such as Lotte, Shinsegae and Hyundai as well as supermarkets in tourist hotspots will implement the system first before it is rolled out to other stores. The World Health Organization is set to hold an emergency meeting in Geneva on Monday to discuss the explosive spread of the Zika virus. Members are likely to discuss whether the virus, linked to an alarming rise in cases of microcephaly, where babies are born with smaller heads and often severe brain damage, should be rated as a global health crisis. Now, several senior health officials have warned that the outbreak could be an even bigger threat to global health than the Ebola outbreak that killed more than 11,000 people in West Africa throughout last year. Now, this is based on the fact that at least 80%, 80, of those infected with it show zero symptoms, and the virus infects a group of highly vulnerable individuals as well, pregnant women, and can cause severe birth defects, as we just heard. Another contrast to Ebola as well with this Zika virus. Zika has no known vaccine or cure for this disease. Now, at least 60 people have been killed and many more injured in a series of coordinated bomb attacks in southern Syria. Syrian state media says 3 bombs exploded near a revered Shiite shrine outside the capital Damascus on Sunday. The first blast was caused by a car bomb that detonated at a bus station near the shrine. 2 suicide bombers then blew themselves up when people gathered at the scene. Now, the group that calls itself Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attacks. ISIS claims more than 76 people have been killed in those attacks. Now, these bombings come as members of the Syrian government and the opposition gather in Geneva for peace talks. The UN has said it is aiming for 6 months of talks, starting with a ceasefire and followed by a political settlement. It has emerged that more than 10,000 young refugees arriving in Europe over the past 2 years have been reported missing. The EU's police intelligence unit, Europol, says thousands of children have disappeared after registering as refugees in European countries. It said around 5,000 are missing in Italy alone, while more than 1,000 have disappeared after arriving in Sweden. Europol warned that some children and young people have unfortunately become the target of forced sexual exploitation and even slavery by criminal gangs. However, the head of Europol says there's also the possibility that some have returned to their families. Save the Children says some 26,000 child migrants entered Europe last year by themselves. Now, the rate of people who regard themselves as healthy is lower in Korea than in almost any other OECD country. Around 2/3 of Koreans believe they are in poor health. But, as our Sun Jung-in reports, the concerns may only be in their heads.
The Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs has released a health status report based on statistics from the OECD. The report showed that only 35% of Koreans aged 15 or older think they are in good health, roughly half of the OECD average of 69%. Japan was the only other country that had a subjective health level below 40%. People in New Zealand, the United States, and Canada reported their health more positively than any other countries. So is it really the case that Koreans are less healthy? Well, as pessimistic as they may be, Koreans' life expectancy is actually higher than the OECD average by more than 1 year at 81.8 years. The report explained that the stark contrast between self-rated health status and objectively measured health indicators could be in part attributed to socio-cultural factors and to Korea's appearance-oriented culture, which is in line with findings from other studies. In a comparison of self-rated and objectively measured weight level, 77% of people who consider themselves overweight were actually classified as overweight. The rate was lower in women than in men. The report calls for government efforts to better inform the public regarding their health status so that people can understand and improve their health in an appropriate manner. 손정인, Arirang News.
Now, we hope, of course, that it never happens, but when we find ourselves in a dangerous situation, potential life or death situation, we need to find help as soon as possible. Now, often we are left with two choices: screaming for help at the top of our lungs or yelling out, "Save me," or something similar. But it turns out that one is a much more effective attention grabber than the other. Our Park Se-young has the details.
After hearing the scream, we immediately know that the woman in the movie is in danger. According to a McGill University research team, the human brain registers the emotions in a person's scream in just 0.1 seconds. In fact, people focus more when they hear someone scream than when they actually hear the word "save me." Researchers say this can be traced back to evolution. Human beings made emotional sounds for survival way before languages, which is why the brain responds much quicker to the former than the latter. In another experiment, the researchers recorded simple sounds expressing happiness, sadness, and anger and presented them to 24 participants. They found that people respond fastest to sounds of happiness and showed the longest reaction to sounds caused by anger. The research team interpreted this as part of the brain's defense mechanism to potentially dangerous situations of anger. The results were published in the scientific journal Biological Psychology. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Now, we almost made it, well, we have made it out of January, but the cold weather is sticking around in Korea on this first day of February. Seoul saw the mercury dip to a frosty -9 degrees Celsius overnight, and it won't get that much warmer, with the daytime high only reaching -2 degrees in the Korean capital. The cold temperatures are being caused by a high pressure system over northern China that is bringing some bitterly cold Siberian winds to Korea's central region. The good news is, though, well, it might be very cold, the sun will be out later and the air is clean with fine dust levels pretty much at normal nationwide. And that's all we have for now on this Monday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in. We'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Until then, goodbye.